Funding for this episode comes from a grant from the Rias Berlin Commission, connecting journalists across Germany and the U.S. since 1992.
Welcome to More to Know, a podcast to explore beyond the headlines. I'm Christopher Conover. On this episode, we look at the changing landscape of solar energy. When it comes to solar energy, there's one crucial and obvious component: the sun. Despite that fact, we're going to start our look at solar in a place not known for golden tans and beach life, but more for golden lagers and lederhosen: Germany.
I mean, here you are, talking to Germans about solar. You think anything about that is a bit odd?
That's David Wiedepohl, the International Managing Director of the German Solar Association. Germany, to the surprise of many, is one of the top countries for energy produced by rooftop solar. We spoke with David in his office in Berlin. It was a typical winter day, rainy, overcast, and cold. But back to his question: why Germany?
The easy answer is to look back at when we started and look back in time, 1970s. Germany, at least West Germany, was what China is today, the workshop of the world. With some of the same consequences that we see in some Asian cities. You had a lot of air pollution in Germany. If you look back in the day, the Ruhr region, it was really, really bad.
That region he's talking about is near Germany's western border with the Netherlands and is just north of the city of Dusseldorf.
You couldn't swim in the river. When I grew up in my hometown of Bremen, you couldn't swim in the river. You couldn't fish. You couldn't even, utilize the water to make drinking water out of it, which you can today. And we were burning a lot of hard coal. We were burning lignite. These were the resources that we had. We had the local air pollution. We had acid rain on our forests. And what has happened in Germany is not unique. We had an environmental movement. What is unique about our environmental movement is these weren't tree huggers. You were talking engineers. You're talking scientists. You're talking business people looking for an alternative form of energy. And, back then, solar was a space technology. It was very expensive. There were very, very few terrestrial applications for it. For instance, in bringing, I think, telephone stations. In the U.S. is one, telephone poles where you didn't have a grid, but you wanted to be able to use a telephone for communication. And in the first technology that we found and applied, apart from hydro that was already there, was wind, which we have quite a few resources in Germany, and then subsequently solar. And with solar, we started in 1990 with the Vorschaltgesetz, the feed-in law, where you had basically electricity in the grid had to yield to green electricity if you were feeding in. And we started as a rooftop market, and Germany to this day is a rooftop dominated market, which also has something to do with the population density that we have. And the interesting thing, why it is worth talking to Germans about solar, is we are the oldest industrial market. We are still the fourth largest national market. Market number one in application is China, 60% of the world market, followed by the US with quite some distance, and then followed by India, the new rising star, and then followed by us and Brazil, and then many other European nations like Spain. But what we are seeing in this development is that many things still happen first in our market. For instance, the grid parity, that Germany was the first market where generated electricity from your house, from your rooftop, was cheaper than what you got from your socket. Batteries, solar home batteries.
It wasn't just the law requiring green energy, be that solar or wind, have supremacy in the transmission grid that made Germany a world leader in rooftop solar. It's also the fact that the vast majority of German homes with solar also have batteries. Some of that is based on cost. For example, in Arizona, a state we'll talk about in a bit, installing a solar battery wall for a home can double the price of the system, which already costs tens of thousands of dollars.
German battery program began in 2012. Yeah, and back then when we started, solar home batteries, 80% of the market was lead-based. Yeah, of course, this has switched to, we say, lithium technologies, but it's one of the things that has happened, the combination with EVs. Today we have a situation where in Germany, 80% of residential systems are installed with a battery.
A 2024 survey by a German electric company found that nearly a third of homeowners plan to install rooftop solar within the next 2 years. The number one reason cited was reducing the cost of electricity, followed by more than half of respondents saying it was for protecting the climate. But on the day we interviewed David, the association sent out a news release saying the number of rooftop solar installations had dropped year over year. Now, when people in the solar industry talk about solar systems, rooftop or otherwise, they often refer to them as PV, which stands for photovoltaic. You would think a drop in installations would be a concern. Well, far from it.
It's very easy. I told you we're still the fourth largest market in the world, and we had the slump that we are experiencing in residential we were expecting. For the following reasons. Just look back 2-3 years. We had the pandemic, people were sitting at home, and they were doing home improvement. And one of the things we noticed is they bought more saunas. They also bought more PV systems. And this is part of, you sit there and you think, ooh, is this, I want to improve my home. How can I do this? And the other one was the price shock of the war against Ukraine that we had. No more Russian gas. Then the pipeline blew up. Yeah, and even though we don't generate a lot of electricity from gas in this country, it affected energy prices, it affected electricity prices, and it generally led to a feeling of we need to have more of our own. And these double effects, they have led to the market between 22 and 23 doubling the residential market. We built 1 million systems on residences, fully integrated systems, 80% with a battery, 60% with charging infrastructure, 38 to 40% with a heat pump. In 1 year, over 7.5 gigawatts on residences alone. Yeah, Germany has roughly the same amount of PV systems than the US. US is the bigger market, but it has more utility scale solar, it has more space. But when it comes to the number of systems now, 5.5 million, that's roughly the same number.
A contributing factor to the shift away from rooftop solar in Germany is also home ownership. According to the Trading Economics website, about 47% of Germans own their homes. In comparison, about 65% of people living in the U.S. own their home, a number backed up by statistics from the Federal Reserve Bank. Obviously, if you don't own your home, it's more difficult to install solar on the roof, especially if you live in an apartment building, which is a popular option in many cities, not just those in Germany or the United States. David says low home ownership, coupled with population density of cities like Berlin or Frankfurt, have led to the rise of what's called plug-in solar.
These are systems you can buy at the local hardware store, you can order them at your online retailer, or you can have them installed by a company, depending on your circumstances. But these are small systems, they will have like 4 panels, they are limited in the wattage that they can inject into your own electricity behind the meter. So a lot of people have balconies or such, and they hang up, and you see them a lot, the plug-in systems. It used to be called balcony solar, but the term that we have established are plug-in systems, because they can also be on the ground. If you're on ground level, if you have a terrace, a garden, people will use these. And once again, bureaucracy. You don't need to register these. You're supposed to register these, but you don't need to get approval to get it. What you do need is a fairly high standard of insulation quality of your electric system as a home, because you use a regular socket that you would normally use to plug in something to draw energy, your lawnmower, your lamp, your vacuum cleaner, and instead you inject up to 800 watts or more, and people also combine this with storage nowadays. So, they store the electricity at certain times. And then draw it. And given where prices are, this is something that has really helped. And to tell you the honest truth, we don't know how many of these systems we have, because you're supposed to tell the utility that you have it, but it turns out not everybody does. There's no fee involved. I think it's just the hassle of having it registered. And there are fancier and non-fancier systems. I was just at the hardware store this weekend and I saw, and there are different, semi-transparent ones depending on what you want to use them for. If they are traditional, let's say, framed plastic glass modules that are fairly heavy, or if you use plastics depending on where you need to mount them. Of course, we highly recommend, if you're in a certain wind area, particularly in the north, to really, really follow those instructions or have them professionally installed, because they can be, I'm not aware of anything that's happened, but in theory they can be a hazard like anything that falls from a building. So so far, the experience overall is very good. We don't exactly know, it's very hard to put the finger on it, but of course it also might discourage people who have potential to have a larger system because they've already done something. But on the other hand, it may be your first dab into I try this, and then I want to get a bigger system because I have seen that I simply save electricity. My father-in-law has one and is very proud of it.
That was David Wiedepol, the international managing director of the German Solar Association, who sat down with us in Berlin. The Big Beautiful Bill, as it's known, was signed into law by President Trump in July. It rolls back federal tax rebates for solar installation by as much as 30%. Many of those solar incentives were put in place by former President Biden's signature law, the Inflation Reduction Act. With all of those factors as a backdrop, the International Renewable Energy Agency ranks the U.S. as number 2 in the world when it comes to solar generation. China is number 1, nearly tripling the amount of solar energy generated in the U.S. But as we've noted, the U.S. market is complex, with local and state laws coming into play along with federal laws, the utilities, and other industries all having a hand in the adoption of solar energy. In Arizona, where parts of the state like Tucson get more than 300 days of sun a year, solar is popular. Neighborhoods are filled with homes covered with panels, utilities are building huge solar fields, and businesses are covering their parking lots with solar panel canopies, giving customers a shady place to park on those triple-digit summer days and supplying energy. To get an understanding of the solar landscape in the state, we sat down with Leah Marquez Peterson. She's an elected member of the Arizona Corporation Commission, which regulates utilities. The Southern Arizona Republican says solar energy began moving to the forefront about 20 years ago.
If you recall, a lot of our activity began in 2005, 2006. The commission had created renewable energy standards or requirement that our utilities would have a certain percentage of solar energy by a certain year. And you saw an onslaught of residential solar customers coming online. More recently, we see a lot of utility scale solar and battery. So we are really at the forefront to solar development. I think we're third in the nation when you rank the different states in the United States in terms of solar development occurring, and their constant openings on utility scale solar. We face challenges though, and that it's no longer a subsidized industry, meaning when it started in 2006, residential customers received payments or incentives in order to support solar, and we're past that. It's more of a free market relationship with solar at this time, especially residential solar. And then we're also facing NIMBYism in Arizona, and really throughout the nation. Not in my backyard is what that stands for. And folks don't want to see utility scale or natural gas plants or transmission or a lot of the components we need to manage this growing energy load that's happening in Arizona. We're facing incredible growth, and we need all sources of energy on the grid.
What's the policy since the Corporation Commission, it's your job, and as a member of the commission, your actual job, to set the vision going forward? What's the vision for solar mostly, but renewables in general, for the goals, what Arizona needs to hit?
We're not setting goals specific to renewable energy. Instead, we're responding to customers, large customers, tech, data centers, manufacturing, that have their own carbon-free goals or zero carbon by a certain year. They've set those, and they're really driving the market towards renewables where it makes sense. But I think the priority I have as a commissioner and my fellow commissioners that serve now is about reliability. We need energy reliability because in the heat of summer, especially in Arizona, it's so hot, it's life or death if we don't have air conditioning. And I'm not being extreme, that's truth. We've had people pass who air conditioning hasn't worked during the summer time period. So it's reliability, and then it's the balance that we must have to keep rates affordable. We are affordable. We're below the national average now in the nation, but we've got to do that to make sure that those in Arizona are taken care of from a reliability, affordability perspective, and that we're also looking to those that want to come into the state of Arizona.
When you talk about that affordability, there has been a change in what is officially known as net metering, how much people with rooftop solar on their homes get back from the utility company, or how much the utility companies pay them for that power going into the grid. Why, and you weren't necessarily on the commission when some of these decisions were made, but net metering has been allowed to shrink the amount of money that the consumer gets. If we're worried about affordability, why go that route, and why not force the utilities to pay more?
So you've seen this debate play out not only in Arizona, but California and other states that have a lot of residential solar customers. Over time, we've lessened the export rate, which is the official term, of the funds that are received by the customers that have solar on their roofs. We've lessened that because it's one neighbor being subsidized by another, in essence. So you see that they likely won't go below the avoided cost, or the cost it would take for the utility to buy that energy elsewhere on the market. We'll try to keep that maintained so that's fair for residential customers. But from our perspective, or my perspective as one commissioner, it won't be an inflated or subsidized amount. And usually when I do a lot of public speaking at chambers, at Rotaries, and I explain to people, we're fully supportive of solar. We want an all-of-the-above approach where it makes sense in different parts, as long as we're focused on reliability as the priority. But one neighbor shouldn't subsidize another neighbor. If you want solar on your home, make sure it makes sense. Make sure you don't have a shaded roof. You use a reputable contractor. You get good financing. And because we have some issues around, people taking advantage of others during that. And then, let's move forward and make sure you've got a program in place. The programs exist. They're just going to be structured differently than they were in 2006.
When you take off out of the Tucson airport, if you've got a window seat and you're on the right side of the plane, you see huge solar fields out towards the south and the east, a little bit of Tucson. Do you see that as the future of solar? So that's the industry level doing it as opposed to the rooftop. And again, that NIMBY issue plays in, as you mentioned.
Most efficient way to grow solar in our state is utility scale solar, because you just have more cost efficiencies. You might have one operator. It's easier to manage and to grow rapidly. But you're right, people do not want to see this near their homes, in essence, and so you see it in more rural communities. In order to have solar or any type of generation out in rural areas, you need transmission lines, though, that bring it from wherever it is into the city center or where the population is. We have challenges with that also. People don't want to see transmission in their backyard. So it's really the negotiation that occurs with each community. I think the future of solar is also agrovoltaic, which what that word means is you might put your utility scale solar in place, but underneath that you're growing agriculture, or maybe you have sheep or you have cattle, if it would make sense. I think we're going to see multiple uses of the land because you see a lot of farmland transitioning to solar and communities responding concerned about that.
How much of the grid in Arizona is solar? What's the breakdown? And I know it's going to vary between APS, Arizona Power in the Phoenix area, and TEP, Tucson Power in southern Arizona. But what's the overall breakdown?
Arizona Public Service is our largest regulated utility. They're based in the Phoenix area, and they produce right now about 19% renewables that are owned and operated by APS, and about another 8% that they're buying out on the market. So they've exceeded 20-some% in terms of renewables. Renewable in Arizona is basically solar. We're not much of a wind state. We have some small portions that have wind, but a lot of these market purchases that come are buying wind energy from New Mexico. Tucson Electric Power down here in the Tucson area is about 21% solar and wind, and another 8.5% market purchases, and another 8% or more private solar. So they're really tracking their residential and the small business solar that's occurring throughout their territory. So each utility has different energy mix. One of the great assets in our state is our nuclear power plant, the Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station. It is in the West Valley of Phoenix, produces about 30% of the energy for the state. APS, Arizona Public Service, is the managing partner in that with 7 different partners. TP's not a partner in the nuclear power plant. So just imagine their energy mix looks entirely different.
Let's talk about the other elephant in the room, the federal government. When the big, beautiful bill was passed, it got rid of some solar subsidies, but at the same time, earlier this year, Congress passed a law that directed the Department of Interior to sell off some land to an Arizona county to develop solar on that land. So it seems like there's an interesting back and forth even within the federal government. So how does federal policy then play with you all at the state level and make everything move forward?
That's a good question. So we are tracking closely federal changes that are occurring. I think the federal government can help us a lot with permitting reform, with transition development across state lines, by limiting some of the regulatory burden that's not as necessary or duplicative. We've seen a lot of focus by the Trump administration on nuclear energy, the development of small modular nuclear. So we're very engaged in that conversation. But from a state perspective, my perspective, it's too expensive at this time. I don't want to see an SMR, as they're called, launched in Arizona and residential customers having to pick up that tab. Could that be a space for the tech or the data center companies? Possibly, if we can work through that and manage some of the permitting reform issues. So I think we're watching closely. We need to be hand in hand with federal policy that's occurring and give feedback when we don't think it makes sense. And just so we're staying on top of all those different issues.
That was Arizona Corporation Commissioner Leah Marquez-Peterson. As she mentioned, an area of growth in the solar sector is agrivoltaics, combining solar and agriculture. Growth in that area was also mentioned by the German Solar Association. To learn more about that, we spoke with Marco Millens, the co-founder and managing director of Feldwerke, an agrivoltaics company. We sat down with him in the company's Munich, Germany headquarters, where he began our conversation with an explanation of what exactly agrivoltaics are.
So basically, agrivoltaic is the combination or like dual use on one field, on one farmland. And how is this actually in real life working? There are many different forms of agrivoltaics out there. You have the the agrivoltaics above your farmland. Then you have the agrivoltaics where you can still harvest in between the modules, and we are focusing on the agrivoltaics where you can still do the harvesting in between the photovoltaics and modules. How is this especially working? So basically, you have 2P tracking systems. Those are like single axis trackers, and they can move from east to west with their modules, so following the sun in the end. And from one module to the next module, we have a distance of up to like 14, 15 meters. And beyond those modules, you have a kind of biodiversity stripe, which also is 1 to 2 meters bright. And you can use this for 3 functions, like first, increase biodiversity. Second, it gives the agricultural farmland kind of pause from intensive agriculture. And third, if you're harvesting there or farming there, you do not necessarily need to drive directly next to the trackers. And so deducting the biodiversity stripe with the distance from 14 to 50 meters up to this, we have agricultural stripe of around 12 to 30 meters, something like this. But it's individual in the end, depending on the machine park of the farmer, how we actually do the distances in between those modules.
The solar modules are in between the rows of crops, so the plants still get the necessary sun to thrive. But Marco says the solar cells also have an advantage for the crops.
Because they are moving and not static, the shadow is also moving and not always on one specific spot. And so there's enough sun getting there, and also the reflections of the sun beyond the modules and so on is a positive effect on the crops. And there's there's several scientific proof already from testing farms, plants of agrivoltaics out there, which already show and display that actually those modules on the field can have a positive effect on the crops itself, on the agricultural yield. How and why? Because it's a kind of protection from extreme weather effects like strong rains, heat, a lot of sun and so on, especially in parts of the country where there's a lot of drought, a lot of sun and so on. So there are already those synergies seeing in the real world out there.
Like when we talked with the Solar Association in Berlin the day we sat down with Feldwerke in Munich, the weather was overcast, cloudy, and rainy. A typical winter day and not good for solar generation. But Marco says that's okay.
Right now in Germany we have more or less 3 main problems out there in the solar expansion market. This is first, we have this land competition between agriculture and energy generation. Right now you have to sacrifice your farmland to generate energy out there with typical solar plants. Second, we have this PV revenue cannibalization. So because we have a lot of south-facing PV plants out there, and therefore we produce a lot of energy from renewables, from solar during the midday hours, but not in the morning and evening hours. And lastly, it's also always about social acceptance and also permission you need for such a plant. And if the social acceptance is low for such a plant, then also the degree or probability of permission is very low. So there we come to agrivoltaics, and also if we are focusing now on the problem with the cannibalization of PV revenues, we get to the point we need to, in the end, match the supply to the demand. And therefore, we need to generate power also in the morning and evening hours. So we put on take the 2P tracking systems with following the sun trackers, and therefore we can generate 20 to 30% more full load hours compared to a typical ground-mounted south-facing system in better hours of the day.
Currently, the energy generated by Feldwerke agrivoltaics goes into the grid for everyone to use. But that's not necessarily the goal.
beneficial for everyone would be if we can directly consume the energy where it is produced locally, like generate decentral energy provision, let's say. So we are always hunting or looking for industry, for also like energy intensive agricultural farmers who in the end directly can consume the energy.
And installing the solar field can also help a farmer's long-term finances.
They are super dependent on weather, on climate, on how the market is developing. If we're importing a lot of potatoes now, then the potato price is sinking here in Germany, and we have a lot of potatoes, then you send them to the biogas plant. So in the end, it's about diversifying and future-proofing agricultural farmers out there. And so you can, with agriculture, you can diversify your farm in the end. And a lot of farmers are very happy about this opportunity without sacrificing in the end their legacy, their farmland over generations built up, and so on.
That was Marco Melenz, the co-founder and managing director of Feldwerke, an agrivoltaics company headquartered in Munich, Germany. There are about 600 agrivoltaic projects in the U.S., according to the Department of Energy. They cover a little more than 65,000 acres and produce about 10,000 megawatts of energy. The upper Midwest, including Wisconsin, Illinois, and Iowa, have a high concentration of those projects, according to the DOE. And like Germany, those are areas not known for golden tans and beach life. But let's circle back to the original question. Why is Germany, a country not known for sun, a historic and current world leader when it comes to solar energy?
To us, it's an engineering problem, and it's also a challenge of the mind.
That was David Wiedepohl with the German Solar Association. And that's it for this episode of More to Know. Join us for future episodes when we look at the beer and auto industries and how the German and U.S. markets are tied together. We'll also look at other topics that have more to know. TJ Spiker produced this episode, and our music is by Enter the Haggis. I'm Christopher Conover. Thanks for joining us.
Funding for this episode comes from a grant from the RIAS Berlin Commission, connecting journalists across Germany and the U.S. since 1992.